Okay, so let's continue with the floods. By the way, we talked about number of deaths from various diseases and then natural disasters. Floods tend to be one of the highest killers in terms of natural disasters, but of course you have earthquakes and volcanoes, which are events that occur quite periodically depending on where you are, and they do kill many people. And you have, of course, lightning killing most people in India, and tornadoes, cyclones, hurricanes can have big impacts in some other places, but overall floods tend to be the big killers. So let's look at an example here of the dynamic world, human activities and floods. Endless floods of Pekin. Most people see floods as something unpredictable and random, as unfortunate anomalies from everyday life that brings disruption and destruction to individuals, households and communities. However, there are millions of people around the world who live in locations in which floods are more or less completely predictable and systematic. They are very seasonal. They depend very much on the amount of rain that falls and depends on where you are. One of these places is Pekin, a rapidly growing suburb to Dakar in Senegal, where a combination of changing weather patterns, increasing population pressures, and failed urban development has created one of the worst examples of unsustainable development in relation to floods in the world. So here we are transitioning from climate change, natural variability into human activities, human land use, and potential for repeated flooding and leading to unsustainable development. Pekin was initially established as a result of a deliberate policy of the colonial authorities to manage the rapid population growth of the post-World War II Dakar. People protested against moving tens of thousands of people to what was then far from the city without ready plans for transportation, education or medical services, and the choice of name is a telling sign where what the local population thought of the place. Pikini means nothing in Wolof, the local language, one of the local languages, maybe the dominant one, the most common language of Senegal, and nobody could imagine that Pekin once would also be a suburb to Dakar. So they look back and think, who thought of this name? After growing slowly for 2 decades, droughts in the 1970s and crises following the externally required structural adjustment programs in the 1980s and 90s caused a literal explosion of people moving into Pekin. There is some climate background to that. There was long droughts in the sub-Sahel region, almost multiple decades from 1940s to 1970s or so, and people, the grazers and so on, were being blamed, saying they are over grazing the animals and creating land use change and creating desertification and so on. And it turned out that actually the droughts were related to ocean warming, which is related to, of course, the industrial activities of the rich countries. So we have to be careful about how the dynamic world gets interpreted as well. The official population of Pikini was, I don't know whether it's also pronounced Pikini when it's written this way. Pikini was 140,000 in 1971 and is estimated to have reached 1 million during 2013, while the real population is undoubtedly much larger and growing at an astonishing rate. The pronunciations, actually I can do some homework and find out, but I'm a little too lazy to do that, so please do that if you're curious about these things. As Pikini or Pekin expanded, the authorities could not keep up, leaving a large part without enforced spatial plans, building codes, as well as without functioning electricity, water, sanitation, drainage, etc. This in turn caused hundreds of thousands of people to settle in local low points and lake beds, talking about pluvial floods now. When weather patterns changed around a decade ago, increasing amounts of rainfall during the rainy season caused groundwater level to rise again, saturating the ground and keeping flood water up to waist or even chest height for extended periods of time. So I'm reading this because it's a good example of how multiple factors come together to create disasters. Some places have been flooded for up to half a year, every year since 2005, causing children to have lived more or less half their lives in an environment with water, humidity, and mold, as well as with pollution, feces, and garbage floating around inside and outside their homes. Imagine, people were moved into these neighborhoods, then they moved by themselves because of economic opportunities and facilities and so on, and now they are living this wretched life. In 2009, the floods directly affected 44% of the people in Bikini, and urbanization and climate change are continuing to aggravate the situation. A poster child for disaster, man-made disaster, right? Even the greenhouse warming and increased rainfall is related to human activities. 4 types of droughts. Again, meteorological drought caused by insufficient rainfall in relation to long-term average, very straightforward. Hydrological drought caused by insufficient water stored in or on or in the ground, so surface water and groundwater. Agricultural drought caused by insufficient soil moisture and or soil nutrients. Socioeconomic drought caused by societal food demands exceeding the available supply. It's important to remember these because drought is not just a drought. It has many dimensions, and early warnings may start to give you a good idea about meteorological drought. Then you have some idea about land use change affecting hydrological droughts. Agricultural droughts, again related to doing monoculture and other things which deplete the soil of nutrients and water retention capacities, loss of carbon from the soil, for example. And of course, socioeconomic drought related to not only population pressures but often exporting food. Pakistan, for example, exports a lot of grains, essentially using a lot of its groundwater, precious groundwater, to grow grains that it's going to export. So when there is a drought, it's going to have societal food demands exceeding the available supply and so on. So it's always a dynamic combination of multiple factors, all often related to human activities, because natural variability is now almost a secondary player. So here is a map of estimated area affected by meteorological drought at least once over 1980 to 2001, so you can find a much more updated map of this, but it doesn't matter. It gives you a good sense of how widespread they are, even in the cold, snowy regions and warmer, wet regions here, cold, snowy regions, wet regions, and so on and so forth. Area with 3 consecutive months with less than 50% of average precipitation at least once are shown in these colors, with other higher definitions for the greenish colors. Okay, so here is drought and desertification in Chad. If you look at the Holocene, the Nile, there was greening of Sahara, and people moved away from Nile all the way into Chad to the west and to the east into Ethiopia, Somalia, Djibouti, Eritrea, and so on. And as Africa began to dry again, they congregated back towards the Nile, but many remained. And this drought and desertification again is a combination of natural variability, human pressure, and man-made changes, land use, climate as well, right? So let's look at one more, the White Menace. Alps are stunningly beautiful with their pointed peaks, sheer rock faces, and lush valleys. However, as snowfall and gravitation combine, steep slopes become treacherous, silently accumulating the wrath of ancient gods in the form of avalanches. So we are going back to the destiny part and risk part that we talked about before. Although 2/3 of all avalanche casualties in Austria since 1950 have been happening in the back country, mainly in relation to skiing, the remaining third have been spontaneously released avalanches that affect communities more directly, something that the villagers of Galtur had to experience the hard way on 23rd February 1999. The year of 1999 started with a series of snowstorms dumping their loads on the Austrian Alps of Western Tyrol. However, what would have been an excellent start of the ski season turned ugly as variations in temperature created a thick layered snowpack that set the scene for unprecedented avalanches that would baffle scientists and mountain rescuers alike. I can point out one thing: the 1997-98 El Nino ended. 99 to 2098 summer, 99-2000 were very strong La Niñas. 1998 summer was a very strong La Niña, which potentially could have an impact on the 99 winter as well. But global warming and impact on snowpack and so on can be factors as well. Then in the morning of February 23rd, the unstable snowpack on the mountain above Galtur suddenly snapped and came roaring down in around 300 km per hour or 198 miles per hour. So 170,000 tons of snow and ice crashed into the village, killing 31 people, plowing through areas that had been considered safe from avalanches and causing the avalanche hazard zones to be reconsidered overall. So people have been living there for decades, maybe even centuries, and something new happened that didn't expect. Is that all climate change? Well, not always, but obviously when things are happening in a warmer world, everything has a component of climate change and warming in it. So other factors we mentioned in the title: cyclones, hurricanes, or typhoons. Cyclone is the scientific name of all rotating storms regardless of where they are on the planet, and then we call them hurricanes in the Atlantic, typhoons over here, and 30% of all cyclones, which is the term for all rotating systems of that scale, are born here. But you can see there are many hurricanes which have an impact on of El Nino and La Nina. North Indian Ocean is small in number, but the largest number of deaths happen here, especially in Bangladesh and India and Burma and so on and so forth. Southern Hemisphere also has cyclones, but obviously stay largely on the ocean, even though now we have had many crashing into Madagascar and Eastern Africa and so on and so forth. So I'll come back and look at heat waves and so on further, talking about dynamic events happening in the modern world with human activities affecting every form of land use, and interacting with increased greenhouse gases, air pollution, water pollution, extreme events, and so on. Okay, so just remember, this is not simply about climate change and extreme events. This is about trying to understand how events interact with the dynamic human system so that sustainable development gets affected constantly. Okay.